That night, it was very hot. The kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes silence feel heavier. Ravi stood just outside the small white gate of a modest house tucked away in the corner of a sleepy neighborhood. His shirt stuck to his back, his collar damp with sweat. But it wasn't the weather that made him hesitate. It was something else entirely. He had been there for almost an hour, not pacing, not calling, just standing, staring at the door that remained closed but unlocked, as if inviting him inside and daring him at the same time. Inside that house was Anjali. Her name alone carried 1,000 memories now, some warm, some dangerous. Ravi ran a hand through his hair, still unsure how the night had led to this moment. He remembered her message just 2 hours ago. Amit's gone. I'm alone tonight. Come if you want, or don't. There was no pressure in those words, but the space between them carried the weight of unfinished business and forbidden desire. He had met her again just weeks ago, purely by accident. A quiet bookstore, a startled hello. She was still as graceful as he remembered, maybe more so. Married now, yes, but the sparkle in her eyes dimmed when she mentioned her husband. Ravi hadn't expected to feel anything, and yet, here he was. The porch light flickered above him. He shifted from one foot to the other, unsure if his hesitations were about morality or fear, or both. He had never done anything like this before. Anjali had been his college crush, someone who slipped through his fingers when life moved too fast. And now she was here, reaching back toward him across the line they both swore not to cross. Ravi approached the door again, his hand brushing the handle. He stopped. His breath shallow, he looked up at the second-floor window. No shadows. Moved. The street behind him was quiet, save for the occasional bark of a distant dog or the soft rustling of tree leaves. The heat was suffocating, but it wasn't just the temperature. His heart pounded against his ribs like a warning drum. What was he hoping to find behind that door? Closure? Passion? Redemption? The memories rushed in again. Anjali's soft laugh, her fingertips trailing across his arm during their last conversation, the way she looked at him like he was still someone worth remembering. And yet, something held him back. He had reached for the door handle 5 times already, only to pull away. There was a line he hadn't yet crossed, and once he did, there would be no return. The door creaked slightly in the warm breeze. Ravi stepped back once more, swallowed hard, and sat down on the edge of the front steps. He didn't know how. The night would end, but he knew this much. The next decision he made would change everything. And still, he waited. It hadn't started with the intention to betray anyone. Ravi told himself that often, hoping it might ease the guilt pressing against his chest like a stone. 3 months ago, he hadn't seen Anjali in over 6 years. Then, one quiet Saturday morning, fate slipped her into his path. He was browsing through old poetry books at a local bookstore when he heard her voice. Familiar, delicate, unmistakable. She stood in the same aisle, holding a copy of Neruda, looking almost exactly as she had in college, except her eyes seemed heavier now, more tired than curious. They laughed, talked, reconnected over coffee. She told him she was married now. Her husband, Amit, ran a textile business and traveled often. She said it casually, but Ravi noticed the hesitation when she spoke his name. He didn't ask more. Not then. What followed were weeks of chance meetings that quickly became planned ones. A lunch turned into long conversations. A few texts turned into midnight phone calls. It wasn't physical, not yet, but something deep began to stir between them. A hunger that wasn't just for touch, but for understanding, for being seen. Anjali admitted things slowly, as if testing the air between them for judgment. Amit is kind, she said once, her voice low. But he's distant. It's like living with someone who's always half a room away, even when he's sitting beside you. Ravi listened, and maybe that was his mistake, because listening turned to caring, and caring turned to wanting. Still, Ravi didn't blame her entirely. He had his share of silence too. Nights spent alone in an apartment that felt more like a waiting room than a home. When Anjali smiled at him, it wasn't just nostalgia, it was recognition. Like someone had finally remembered he was still alive. But as the days passed, the lines blurred. She began holding his hand longer, leaning closer. One evening, as they parted under the soft yellow lights of a cafe awning, she touched his cheek gently and whispered, "I miss feeling real." That was the night she kissed him. Ravi hadn't stopped it. He couldn't. It felt like breathing after years underwater. It wasn't just desire, it was relief, comfort, the illusion of safety in someone else's longing. Since then, their secret had grown roots, and with it, guilt bloomed. Every time she returned to a meet, every time Ravi lay awake wondering what. This made him, the heat inside grew hotter. Now tonight that heat had spilled into the air. She had messaged again. "The door's open, it's quiet, just come in, I need you." And yet, even as Ravi stared at the house, he remembered something else from their last meeting. She had whispered it without looking at him. "If this is a mistake, I'll regret it forever. But if we don't do this, I'll regret it just the same." The street was still, the silence deeper. And Ravi remained frozen, on the edge of a decision no one could unmake. The night pulsed with tension as Ravi finally rose from the steps. His fingers trembled as he reached for the door, not from fear of being caught, but from knowing that after this moment, nothing would ever be the same. He pushed the door gently. It opened with a whisper. The house inside was dim, lit only by a single table lamp casting golden shadows across the living room. The air was cooler inside, but Ravi still felt hot, as if the weight of the decision clung to him like smoke. He stepped in, closing the door quietly behind him. And there she was. Anjali stood barefoot at the edge of the hallway, dressed simply in a loose cotton kurta, her hair tied back carelessly. Her eyes met his, unblinking, searching. For a moment, neither said a word. Then she spoke, her voice soft and steady. "You came." "I didn't think I would," Ravi admitted. "I tried not to." Anjali took a few steps forward. "But you did. And so did I." There was no rush, no wild grabbing or clumsy passion, only the quiet movement of two people standing too close to a line for too long. When she reached out and placed her hand on his chest, Ravi felt every beat of his heart echo in that touch. "I feel alive again when I'm with you," she whispered. "Is that wrong?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to remind her of vows, of consequences, of the husband who still wore her photo in his wallet. But none of that came out. Instead, he placed his hand over hers and nodded, just slightly, as if surrendering to something both dangerous and inevitable. The kiss that followed was soft, then deep, then overwhelming. It wasn't lust that took over. It was ache. Years of silence, of unspoken longing, of quiet sadness spilled out in that embrace. The room blurred. All that remained was her warmth, her breath against his, her eyes searching his face like she needed to memorize it. Later, they sat in silence, the weight of what they'd done slowly settling over them. "I don't hate him," Anjali said suddenly, staring at the ceiling. "That's the worst part. He's a good man. He just stopped seeing me." Ravi nodded slowly. Sometimes love doesn't end with shouting. It just fades until someone else notices the silence. She turned to him, her voice barely audible. "What happens now?" Ravi didn't have an answer. All he could do was hold her hand a little tighter, as if that could delay the morning. In the silence that followed, guilt seeped in like a slow-moving storm. It would come. Maybe not tonight, but soon. And still, they stayed there, side by side, trapped between desire and consequence, hearts beating loudly in a house too quiet for what it now contained. Morning came quietly, without apology. The golden light slipped through the sheer curtains, stretching slowly across the floor, painting soft shadows over the chaos that had bloomed in the night. Ravi lay still, half awake, his arm resting beside Anjali's. She hadn't moved. Her breathing was steady, eyes closed, her face turned away from him. But peace was a lie now. What had been tender hours ago now felt too loud in his memory. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, an uninvited reminder that he was somewhere he didn't belong. Each step he took toward the bathroom, toward his clothes, toward the door, felt heavier than the last. In the mirror, his face looked older, wearier. There were no bruises, no visible scars, but his reflection felt broken. Ravi wasn't the kind of man who hurt others. And yet, here he was, standing in the aftermath of something beautiful and wrong. When he returned to the room, Anjali was awake. Her eyes followed him, but she said nothing. Her hair was a mess, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to speak but didn't trust her voice. Finally, she whispered, "Last night wasn't a mistake." Ravi paused, heart quickening. But it wasn't right either. A silence settled between them, thick, uneasy. They both knew what had happened wasn't about lust or impulse. It was something deeper, a longing to be seen, a desperation to feel alive again. But the truth still stood. Someone had been betrayed. "I don't regret it," Anjali said, pulling the sheet over her chest. "But I can't do this again. I can't live in between guilt and escape." He nodded. "I didn't come here to take you away." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "I know. That's why it hurts more." Ravi sat beside her one last time. He wanted to say something, anything, that could turn this into something noble, something meaningful. But sometimes, the most painful truth is that love isn't always clean. Sometimes it's messy and misaligned, blooming in all the wrong places, at all the wrong times. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold it back either. "I'll go before anyone sees," he said quietly. Anjali just nodded. She didn't cry. Neither did he. As Ravi stepped out into the morning heat, the world outside felt the same. Birds chirping, bikes rolling down the street, neighbors watering plants. But he had changed. They both had. That night had burned through them like wildfire, brief, bright, and irreversible. And as he walked away, he didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, are never meant to open again. And some stories, no matter how tender, are never meant to last.